Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is live today at Maynard's in Margate, where the Sports Bash is on location. Ryan Rothstein, Mike Gill, and Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com is here to talk draft. Football at 4 pretty much all day, but now we're going to get a little granular on the whole situation as the Eagles draft number 10. They're on the clock at about 9:15 tonight. Will we know who the next Philadelphia Eagle will be? And they have pick 30 tonight. What are the chances in your mind they take both picks in the spot that they currently own?
I don't think that's very likely. I don't. And when I sort of conjure these mock drafts, I don't account for trades or trade backs or anything like that, but I think that there's a strong likelihood that if the board falls a certain way, which I can certainly envision it going, the Eagles are going to be aggressive in trading up for two of those linemen, and Will Anderson and Jalen Carter, who we've talked about extensively during the show so far. And I could also see them trading back if a certain player, if they feel like they can get a certain player, no further than 15, which we'll probably get into later as to why, but I think that there's going to be some flexibility there from Howie Roseman.
All right, Andrew, I know it's a tough question to answer, but is there a perfect night, a perfect scenario, a perfect night for them?
For me,
like if Howie Roseman says, he woke up today, he stretched, maybe yawned, maybe had an omelet.
Maybe did it like a Sudoku puzzle or something, trying to see how his
your morning routine is. Yeah. And he said, man, this is what I want to have happen for us tonight.
I think that you would see a player like Will Anderson fall within 5 or 6. You find a trade partner. Obviously, it takes 2 to tango. We know that. But I think being able to grab a pass rusher who can be elite at the pro level, double-digit sack guy to complement what you have in Josh Sweat and be a weapon on defense, I don't think that can be understated. And then at the back end of the first, I think nabbing a player like a Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back from Alabama, would just add such a unique dimension to the offense, to an already explosive offense. I think it just makes it that much better. I think when you look at it in those terms, that would just be a home run draft for Howie.
All right, well, let's get some questions and kind of chew on a couple of things. I guess let's start with this. We had a question a little earlier that we teased, and then we never really got to. And, it's an interesting one when you talk about, somebody brought up the trade proposal, but what about Tyree Wilson? He falls in the 8 range. Cole from LBI says, I think the Eagles would need to trade up and get him if he fell to the 8 range. And I guess, number one, the possibility of seeing Tyree Wilson get to the 8 range, like what would have to happen in front to kind of make that scenario happen?
Well, I think the Texans would have to go off script because that's the first team at 2 that could be looking to acquire his services. And then 3, I think that the Cardinals are going to look and find a trade partner, possibly with the Tennessee Titans for a quarterback. So then you're looking at 4, the Colts. I think the Colts could be in play for C.J. Stroud, maybe even Anthony Richardson. And then at 5, the Seattle Seahawks would be the team that I think would be looking for a defensive lineman, and they could potentially have their choice between those 3 players. To me, I think that they would go the route of Jalen Carter because I think that there's more of a need there along their interior. But that's where the conversation would start for those guys.
Like for me, when we talk about guys that the Eagles could end up snagging, if you will, like guys that would fall in a range of 8 to 12, and now all of a sudden you're sitting there as Howie Roseman or the Eagles front office like, okay, wow, we have an opportunity here. For me, it goes back to how much weight, Andrew, should we put into Howie's words on, last Friday, 6 days ago, where he says, I want to go after an impact player, right? Like part 1, like what does that mean? How much should we weigh into all of that? And part 2, like, how is he viewing this draft? Like, is he really looking at number 10 and saying, you know what, I want to utilize it as coming off a Super Bowl trip as just like a fantasy draft? I hear the fans. Let me entertain him. I'm going to get Bijan. Or I'm going to go and try and get Jalen. Like, you get my point.
Sure.
How do we factor in all of what we've heard?
I think Howie
the
loves
noise?
it.
Yes.
I think Howie loves it right now because you're hearing like at least 12 different players tied to the Eagles. No one literally knows what they're going to do. I mean, we haven't even talked offensive linemen.
Yeah.
We talked about Peter Skoronski and we talked about Paris Johnson. you just invested heavily in your quarterback for the next 5 years. You might want to arm him with even more protection. You look at a line with Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, and maybe a Skoronski, let's say, at right guard.
Right.
And then you would have to look at right tackle in the future. But all of a sudden, you have a young offensive line to grow with your quarterback. So that's something that should be considered there at that spot.
It's weird because last year I would say the star of the Eagles offense, they have A.J. Brown, they have Jalen Hurts. The star of their team over the last 2 years has been their line.
Absolutely.
They made it to the playoffs the year before without A.J. Brown, without an MVP-level quarterback play. They made the playoffs. Now, they played a schedule that was, not so tough, but guess what? You still got to win those games. And how did they win? Behind that offensive line. Their offensive line has been the star of this team.
Yeah.
So with that, I say I don't want to take an offensive lineman. And here's my reasoning. I got a
At least in the first round, you mean?
I have yes, exactly. I'll take one of them wherever.
Yeah.
I have a 7th-round tackle.
But that's a needle in the haystack.
Right.
Fair. I have a 2nd-round guard. I have a 6th-round center. And last year I had a 3rd-round guard. You guys looking at what I'm saying here is I have a good offensive line. The only guy I put big draft capital into was Lane Johnson at number 3.
A decade ago.
Right. So I haven't had to draft a guy we keep talking about they like to build in the trenches. The one guy they took in the offensive line in the first round, they didn't play, Dillard.
Well, that's just how it's panned out, right?
I get that, but my point is their offensive line is the star of this team, and they have one first-round player on it.
I mean, there's a little luck involved with that, right? I mean, in the 7th round, you're going after flyers off players with intriguing intangibles.
I get Dillard is a complete flyer, and he's a complete.
Well, no. I'm talking
about
not Dillard. No. I said Dillard. I meant
but also Jason Kelsey his athletic testing was excellent. So in the 6th round, why not? He's an undersized center. Let's see if we can get him in there and see what he can do.
That's my point. Is much like the running back conversation. It's what I don't value the running backs, even though he's elite. I'm not going to take him because I can get a guy in the 3rd who's going to give me production. The Eagles have already shown I can draft a guy in the 3rd, and he's going to be very good. I can draft a guy in the 6th, and his traits are going to be very good. So I don't think I need to spend capital on the 10th overall pick in the draft by the way, a unit that is already the best in football.
They're absolutely amazing. But how much do they factor all that in,
right,
Andrew? Like, is Howie legitimately saying, I'm asking seriously, like, is he saying, you know what, because we've built in these later rounds, because we've swung and hit grand slam, bedlam at the bank home runs in these drafts, that we don't have to look there in the first round?
That's a fair question. I don't think he's taking that into account at all. For every Kenny Gainwell, there's a Ryan Moats, there's a Donnell Pumphrey, and they're looking at it from a running back perspective.
Yeah.
I think if you have a chance to add an elite player, let's not overcomplicate this. You take the elite player. I mean, you could get steak, or you could get, a
cheeseburger from McDonald's,
or you can get a cheeseburger. Yeah. They're both going to get you full, but I mean,
one's going to be more enjoyable. Yeah.
and ultimately better for you.
And then that's part of my question of, like, the luxury coming off the Super Bowl. You have 2 first-round picks. At what point do they start to say, all right, now we have to go through our progression, so to speak, of building our team in the draft, right? Like, do they start at 30? Do they start in the 2nd round? Do they start at 10 and get a guard? Right?
Well, that goes back to the guard question.
Yeah.
Is a guard a top 10 player?
Well, for the Eagles, a guard very well may be, because that is their longstanding philosophy. When they look at it long term, they may say, our bread and butter, what's gotten us to be such a prominent team for the past 20-some years has been the trenches. So we want to continue that and add to the embarrassment or riches of what we already have.
But those players, they haven't been taken in that high in the draft.
Yeah, but you
see
can't
what
always,
I'm saying, though?
Yeah,
like,
but you don't
they have a system that they have good coaching. They've groomed players that they happen to not get in the first round. Like, I can't – Lane Johnson, they took in the first round.
But even on the defensive side, Fletcher Cox was the first round.
That's different. Yes, I would take.
Javon Hargrave was a free agent signing because they had continuously whiffed at the position. Broderick Bunkley, you just go down the list.
But that's different. I would value that position at number 10.
First round pick.
That's a completely different thing. I'm talking about on the offensive line.
Derek Barnett.
I have made picks, and I have a coach, and we have a system that has produced players Look, they took Jack Driscoll in the 4th round. Now you might say, well, you don't want him starting. But if he was my weakest link on the offensive line, I think that there's a lot of teams that would like to say Jack Driscoll's the worst player they have, right?
Sure.
Nate Herbig, they was a free agent. Started half the year for them.
Yeah,
then he got a free agent contract.
Yeah, but comparatively, when they took Lane
Big
Johnson,
V.
when they took Lane Johnson, I understand that was a decade ago. They took him high and they swung for it, and he's their best player on their team still to this day. So, I mean,
I'm not devaluing. I'm just saying.
No, listen, I pulled up this study from Forbes from a few years back. Undrafted players were the 3rd most likely group to compromise NFL starters back in 2015. Right? So, it was first-rounders, 30% were first-rounders of the starters. Then it was 25% 2nd through 4th, and then undrafted. Right. So, your point is, do you get a guard that you know is going to start for the next 12 years and is going to be a huge asset to your team, or do you take a skill position player that's more of an unknown? This guy could be an all-pro. He could be a complete bust.
This would be the difference. Although you took a skill position player, say Bijan Robinson, you probably only have him on your roster for 5 solid years.
Yeah, his
the
rookie
offensive
contract,
lineman is probably here 10 to 12 years if you hit on him.
Yeah.
Right.
That's your difference.
Right. I think if you have a chance to add an elite player at the position, a position in which they value, you go for it. I don't think that, like I said, I don't know that we should overcomplicate it. And, a lot of the players that you mentioned as far as being taken at the mid-rounds and even late in drafts, those are the exception, not the rule.
Also, what's this team's...
They have a lot of exceptions on this team.
Well, they have a couple.
Yeah. This may sound like an idiotic question, but what's this
Jason
team's...
Peters? Another one.
Yeah, Jason Peters was a tight end in college.
He was
Arkansas.
a 7th-round pick, though.
Yeah.
7th rounder.
Yeah, but they traded for him.
Right, but I'm saying, again, there was a guy that someone didn't put a lot of draft capital in, and he turned into be one of the greatest players at his position of all time. Hey, I'm not devaluing.
They traded a 1st-round pick for him.
Yes, yeah. That's a lot. I mean, what's the team's window of winning a Super Bowl? Because you have a young star in Jalen Hurts, but you're also coming off the Super Bowl appearance. So that factors into this too a little, right?
Sure it does.
Are we retooling? Are we rebuilding? Are we adding depth? Or are we swinging for the fences?
Well, they're a year or two away from not having either starting corner, right? So let's just thinking this through here. Lane Johnson may have 1 or 2 years left. That's their best player.
Yeah.
Jason Kelsey is on the clock's, he's
for
on the
years.
clock.
Yeah,
you drafted his replacement last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we haven't seen him play center yet. So there's a lot of question marks here, and a lot of the players that I just mentioned are cornerstone players for this team right now. So I think to answer your question, Ryan, I think that there's probably, you can say comfortably, maybe 2 years. With Jalen Hurts, they're going to be competitive for a number of years. But I think the Super Bowl window
It's 2 years.
It's 2 years.
All right.
Just because of the expiring contracts and
I don't know what that's worth, but it's worth something as we try and talk this out to.
Well, you got to keep in mind what's the timeline of Hurts' contract and how it parallels with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Dallas Goedert. Keep this in mind for the draft tonight, everybody, or tomorrow, probably more tomorrow.
Yeah.
Dallas Goedert is now 28 years old. He is the same age Zach Ertz was when they drafted Goddard, who eventually replaced Ertz. And I would think that a spot in this draft this year, maybe not tonight, would be to find that second tight end for Goddard. Because when Goddard went out, while they won and they didn't really miss a beat, they kind of changed the offense a little bit. But Grant Calcaterra and Jack Stoll, I don't know that they want to go into another season where they're the primary backups.
I hope not.
No, certainly not. And I think
it's a good tight end class.
Yeah, it is. And I think a second tight end would completely, alter the dimension of it, just as a Bijan Robinson would. And you can't help but wonder if they trade back from 10, maybe get to 15. A tight end like Dalton Kincaid just reminds me of a carbon copy of Zach Ertz. And getting that duo back together, more or less. I mean, I think that just creates so many mismatches and optionality for Jalen Hurts to work the middle of the field, alleviate some pressure. So, I mean, it's something to consider, certainly.
Yeah, well, think about this night, guys, and how things have been thrown off over the years. What are we thinking about in terms of what we talked about earlier, adding a player, an established player? Is that the better route to go for where I'm talking about where you're at?
Yes.
The window of this team. the Super Bowl window, is it better to say, hey, we have a window right now, let's get an established player? Or is it the better idea to think more longer term? You know, Adam Kaplan, who does Football at 4, he'll be on tomorrow. He always says the draft isn't about this year, it's about future years. But the fans always think of it as, I want that guy to help us today, week 1.
And that trade would make sense. Buda Baker is who you're alluding to. That trade would make sense for the Eagles because the window is open. And they are set up to contend for another Super Bowl. And he is a chess piece on the back end for Sean Desai. He can do a multitude of different things.
He's a proven commodity.
He's a fantastic blitzer. He can do all these things and alter your defense. So I think that's something to explore, only because the Eagles are set up to make another Super Bowl run right now.
Well, this is Football at 4, and this would be big. This would be a storyline for the night.
Lamar Jackson.
Jay Glazer and Dan Graziano are reporting the Ravens are making good progress on a deal with Lamar Jackson. So that could really change the complexion of the night if he gets traded, and depending on where he goes. Now, I said yesterday, if he goes to San Francisco, they become the favorite in the NFC.
Nah.
I don't think so.
You don't think so
either?
No.
Man, they went to the NFC Championship game last year with Brock Purdy.
I don't understand how you sign OBJ for $100 billion and then you're going to trade Lamar Jackson.
With the understanding that Lamar is going to be there.
What are they doing? I thought this team was a well-run, fine-tuned machine. They look like they're idiots.
If he doesn't want to play there, I mean.
Well, didn't they know that before they gave OBJ this contract?
Oh, I think they signed him thinking that Lamar might change his tune.
Well, that's a horrible signing.
Don't you?
I mean, that's a bad signing.
It's a horrible signing.
I didn't like the signing either.
They're bumbling their way through a really bad offseason.
It's
really
like
Keystone Cops over there. I don't know what's going on.
I didn't like the signing. I don't think he's an number 1 receiver anymore.
No.
But if you signed him with the thought of maybe Lamar will then back off his demands because we got him a weapon, maybe that's the way they looked at it.
That's the only way I can wrap my head around it, right? Of trying to comprehend signing him.
I said way back when Lamar got hurt and this whole thing happened in the middle of the season, he will never play quarterback for that team again. And I think it's mutual. I don't think they want him really to play quarterback there anymore. I think they're just kind of going through the motions to make it seem like they do. But I don't think they want him to come back.
So they signed OBJ to that monster contract with the likelihood or the understanding that it could potentially be Tyler Huntley under center, getting him the football.
Made the Pro Bowl last year.
Pro Bowl or Tyler?
Come on, you made the Pro Bowl last year.
I did.
That was a joke.
No, I mean, and where do they draft? Baltimore.
There's later.
So they could be in the Hendon Hooker area.
Potentially, if they want to get a
early
20s.
Yeah,
he's a 25-year-old passer.
Who's, by the way, probably out for the year.
Right. So, yeah, you're talking about not even really getting up and running until you're 26. I don't know.
Okay. Are they in the Anthony Richardson business?
They could be.
Okay. So I think they have to have another plan in their back pocket of, we're going through this year. They're at 22, by the way.
Okay.
So we have something in our back pocket on this draft night that we're going to leave without Lamar Jackson, and someone else is going to be our quarterback tomorrow.
You have to have a contingency plan in place. But the way that they're running things over there right now, nothing would surprise me.
Right. That's how I feel like they have no idea what's coming and what's next.
Yeah, they'll probably get a pass rusher or something off the wall.
Right, exactly. A center. I mean, who knows?
Give us a couple names that you're in your mind right now that we really haven't touched on enough today.
Yeah, there's in the first round every year, guys, there's always a handful of players that get drafted, and it's a surprise to many. But if you cover the draft all year long, as I do, it's not really a surprise to me. And I think at the back end of the first round, you could look at a player like Joe Tippmann, the center. I mean, there hasn't been a single center mentioned. John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota has been mentioned, but I think that Tippmann is even better. You look at a team like the Eagles, who would make a lot of sense. He's 6'6", 313, could offer some guard versatility, immensely athletic, great player in space. I look at a corner like Julius Brents from Kansas State. He's 6'3", 200 pounds, and has like a 41.5-inch vertical leap. Teams are more inclined to bet on intangibles, traits, and different things like that at the back end of the first round. Steve Avila, the guard, who's from TCU, who I mentioned. The Dallas Cowboys would make a lot of sense there at 26. Keanu Benton, the defensive tackle. If you're a team that maybe you're not sold on a Brian Brzee, who has an extensive injury history and he's immensely raw, or you're not sold on an Elijah Cansey or a Kalijah Cansey who's immensely undersized, and you don't know that he can be an every down player, well then why don't you go for somebody that is going to be a 3-down player in Keanu Benton? And Anton Harrison, lastly, the tackle from Oklahoma, I think is going tonight as well, and he hasn't been mentioned.
Okay, well, there's a lot of guys to keep an eye on there.
What about
guys?
Joey Porter Jr.?
I think he's an
how do you
interesting fit.
stack up the corners?
Yeah.
I think Joey Porter Jr. goes around 14 to the Patriots, in my opinion. I think he'd be a good fit there. They have Jonathan Jones and Jack Jones at corner, the Jones brothers. That's not good enough to get it done. He strikes me as a player that would fit that defense really well. He's a physical guy, good ball skills. He gets his hand on a lot of footballs. He doesn't produce a lot of turnovers. But I really like what he can be as a day one starter type of player. I have him a little bit behind. Obviously, I have Christian Gonzalez as my top corner, to answer your guys' question. Devin Witherspoon, 2. And then for me, I actually like Deonte Banks, the corner from Maryland. I prefer him over Porter Jr., but I think Joey Porter goes slightly before Banks does. And then after that is when you could see some of the names like an Emmanuel Forbes starting to get in the conversation, perhaps a Julius Brents, or even a Cam Smith from South Carolina. I think there's going to be an earlier run on corners in this draft, and that's why you might see some of those guys that have these second-round labels sort of elevate into the first-round conversation.
Yeah, what about, real quick, I mean, wide receiver is not a position we hear a whole heck of a lot about with this team, but talked about it with John the other day about, he says, hey, you want to improve the offense, add another receiver to this group in terms of how that could change the dynamics of this offense, because they didn't get a lot of production from their third wide receiver this past year.
Right. You want to get your quarterback some help, right? You just signed him to a lucrative deal. So I think Jackson Smith and Jigba would be a good player. I have a sneaky suspicion that Green Bay is going to be a big player for him at 13. So, I mean, Zay Jones.
By the way, this message that just came in. It looks like the Ravens are expected to announce that they are coming to an agreement on a contract extension with Lamar Jackson, which means I would be wrong that he will never play quarterback for that team again unless they sign him to a deal and then trade him.
Sure.
But, sorry.
Zay Flowers from Boston College, I love his tape. I think he's a good player that could fit within maybe like a Dallas offense potentially. I mentioned offensive line, but I think that he would be a good fit for them as well as a movable piece, sort of like a Tyler Lockett type of player. Jordan Addison's another player that I think will go in the first round. So, I mean, there's going to be a number of pass guys. This is not an elite draft for wide receivers, by the way. This is there's a lot of there's not an alpha in this class, but there's a lot of players that can step in and contribute early on.
All right, football at 4. Andrew DiCecco.